depending on where you think or how you model the Ross ice shelf and the Greenland ice shelves collapsing into the sea. Miami, you know, could face the middle part of this century as a subtropical Detroit. And so this scene begins at my grandmother's 80th birthday party. And it's a Dominican birthday party. I don't think anybody here has ever been to a Dominican birthday party. I don't know, there's one person who's written 7 books on Latin America, so maybe he's been to a few Latin birthday parties. But Dominican birthday parties are loud. And so, my grandmother's 80th birthday party was held on the 49th floor community room of the Jade Brickell condominium. If you've been to a Dominican birthday party, you know it's a family affair, and that our families are expansive and warm-hearted, prone to fits of dancing that last late into the night. 74 people showed up to drink rum and wine and champagne, to dance salsa, bachata, and merengue, to eat pastelitos, to scarf down Dominican birthday cake, which, with its ruby red filling of guava and perfectly soft sponge, is the non plus ultra of birthday cakes. I will fight people on this. Among those in attendance were my brothers and primos and nieces and nephews and tias from my mother's side, who live out in the western and southern suburbs of Miami. My paternal tios flew in from the Dominican Republic. My primos who live in Connecticut and Washington, D.C. also made the trek to Miami, which functions as a center of gravity for our far-flung tribe. Most of us were still bleary-eyed and hungover from my cousin's wedding the night before, but Abuela had spent a week working with the DJ to set the music list. So when it started playing, there was no choice. A bailar. From the Jade's community room, you could look east over Biscayne Bay to the mangrove green of Virginia Key and straight on to the infinite ultramarine of the Atlantic horizon. Just to the north are the cranes of Port Miami and the million-dollar condos of Fisher Island. Across Government Cut stands South Point, its towers guarding the entrance of the bay like Baroque pastel-covered sentinels. If you look west, you can peer around competing skyscrapers and glimpse a violently green tropical cityscape, a sea of gridiron, palm-studded suburbs that yawns west and south and east. My parents live in the Jade, even though it's right next to the ocean, and I told them not to buy it there. I told them that it was vulnerable. But after decades in the suburbs, they like to joke that living downtown and taking public transportation makes them feel like millennials. Maybe it's the hangover, and here you have to understand, I had talked to a gentleman named Ben Kurtman. He's an atmospheric scientist, and he's the one who told me 6 feet by 2100 is pretty likely. And I talked to another woman named Caroline Lewis, who'd explain to me what climate feedback loops are. We can get into that in a second. Maybe it's the hangover, but the thought of Kurtman's predictions and of Lewis's feedback loops keep me from enjoying the fun. How foolish would it be to hope to throw my own 80th birthday party here in Miami? The south of Florida may not exactly be the nicest place to live in 2067. As my cousins chat with each other, I wonder about the predictions made by the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, a planning body that projects a range of anywhere between 14 and 34 inches of sea level rise by 2060. As my mom and stepfather danced to Ojalá que llueva café en el campo, a 1980s merengue classic, I can't help but dwell on the South Florida Water Management District's models, which assume 1.6 feet of sea level rise by 2060, 1.7 degrees Celsius of warming, and either 10% more or 10% less precipitation. Climate change is one heck of a buzzkill, but does it necessarily mean that Miami is doomed? Though regional climate modeling is an inexact science, the data that exists paints a survivable scenario up to a point. Yes, 20% of the land area in the county sits at less than 2 feet above sea level. That means about 500 square miles of land must either be defended or abandoned. Some 60,000 people who live on that land would have to adapt their dwellings or migrate. Certain municipal services like freshwater delivery, trash pickup will be much more expensive for the people who stay. And somebody is going to have to figure out what to do with those hundreds of thousands of property parcels in the county that currently use septic tanks to treat their waste. How are they going to hygienically use a toilet? The landscape visible from the top deck of the Jade is going to be irrevocably altered. The barrier islands visible from the Great East Window, Key Biscayne, Virginia Key, Miami Beach, they're all going to be significantly smaller. and the endless expanse of subtropical suburb that rolls out to the south and the west will experience a lot more flooding. Running a city under these conditions will be a huge challenge. And it's not like the water is going to magically stop coming when we hit 2060. In fact, every day we dither away without major cuts to CO2 emissions makes survival more difficult. But smart and timely policy enacted ASAP at the local, state, and federal levels could enable Miami to successfully adapt to a limited amount of climate change. If those adaptation policies were coupled with worldwide mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions aggressive enough to limit global mean temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, my hometown might just have a fighting chance. It's a narrow road with little room for error when it comes to adaptation, a thin path that requires absolutely everyone to get their shit together when it comes to burning fossil fuels, and one that gets steeper, more treacherous with every passing day, which is why we must imagine the Emerald City at the road's end. What would success in adapting Miami to such a level of climate change look like? What is it going to take for me to be able to throw my 80th birthday party in Miami? You would hope that by 2060, we still have the core parts of our economy in place, explains Jim Murley when I put the question to him over the phone. Murley is the Chief Resilience Officer for Miami-Dade County, a genial older man with a quick smile who favors lightweight tan suits and broad Panama hats. He's in charge of coordinating many of the actions that might make my future birthday party possible. And I don't mean he's the one ordering the pastelitos. Part of Jim's job is figuring out how to get electricity, water, goods, and people into Miami and waste and sewage out once all that seawater and heat and potentially rain show up. We want to create a managed environment, says Jim. And to do that, you need water, sewer, a transportation system. You need your key educational and health facilities. And you hope that other qualitative things that brought 2.8 million people and 15 million tourists are also here. So beaches and natural areas, he says. Riley's vision sounds simple enough. I mean, it's a working city with decent schools and healthcare and some nice beaches. It's sort of like the least you could ask for. And yet even the middle of the road regional climate predictions seem to place such pedestrian desires disastrously out of reach. So I called Jane Gilbert, the city of Miami's own chief resilience officer, well, now former chief resilience officer, but we won't go into that story, what it would take to get there. To get it right, regardless of whether you're Miami Beach or Sweetwater or Homestead or anywhere else in the United States, I think of adaptation in 4 main buckets of work that needs to be done, she said. Her first bucket is strategic planning. Gilbert points out that resources are limited and the effects of climate change on urban environments not completely understood. To ensure resources don't go wasted, a lot of careful thinking and mapping have to go into where and when and into what level adaptation should be designed. The city of Miami is involved in just such a major strategic planning initiative as it seeks to future-proof its stormwater system against climate change. That proposed overhaul brings us to the second bucket, public infrastructure. As Murley mentioned, services like water, electricity, transportation, education, solid waste, stormwater, and sewer water must be intelligently and economically adapted to an extra 2 feet of water that will be sloshing around. Private infrastructure also has to be hardened. This is Gilbert's third bucket. So houses have to be built higher and made more energy efficient. Condominiums, office buildings have to be retrofitted to survive stronger floods, higher winds, longer periods without power after a major storm. Privately owned seawall bulkheads must be raised. Building codes and land use laws have to be rewritten. Governments can spur this private adaptation with smart policies, but they have to convince private citizens that the cost of such changes are worth it. They have to convince people to stick around. Which brings us to Gilbert's final bucket, education and outreach. Adaptation to climate change is an expensive process full of hard choices that are easily misunderstood. Homeowners may very well band together to defeat a public infrastructure adaptation project. This is happening now if they don't understand the trade-offs. They're already doing so on Miami Beach, where residents' hostilities to road raising is snarling the pace of preparation. Climate change itself is easily misunderstood, and comprehension of the phenomena is liable to break down along partisan ideological lines. So governments need buy-in before they start, and that means effectively communicating the risks of climate change and the need for adaptation without spooking people and businesses into moving away. Gilbert's buckets don't just apply to Miami. They are a way of measuring what your own city or town or region is doing to prepare for the changing climate. Every human community faces increased risks, whether from wildfires, hurricanes, spiking temperatures, droughts, or shifts in weather patterns. And though the current citizens of Miami are looking at much more uncertain futures than most people today, intelligent adaptation is smart business. It's the sort of thing that often pays for itself in the form of reduced losses from climate shocks and stresses. Like you can make money doing this. Gilbert doesn't doubt Miami's ability to adapt. We're actually one of the most resilient cities already in the country, given what we've been through, whether it's hurricanes or Marielitos or economic collapse or Zika. We've rebounded every time, she says. But she is concerned about regional, state, and federal actors who also have to do their part in order for Miami's work to even count. Getting our water supply right, she says. County water and sewer, South Florida Water Management District, Everglades restoration. That's critical, she notes. Miami is also going to need the state of Florida to get its act together and acknowledge that climate change is a real urgent issue. According to Gilbert, they're the pass-through for FEMA and HUD and a lot of infrastructure funding. And the region is going to need to access that aid to make the dramatic changes that are required. The federal government must step up plans as well, primarily in the form of infrastructure support, she says. The international community also has to act, aggressively working to meet its emission levels set within the Paris Agreement to keep average global temperatures from rising 2 degrees Celsius. So a heck of a lot of things have to break Miami's way if I'm going to have any possibility of having my 80th birthday bash in this town. The city and the county, they're going to have to work together to fill their buckets. And the region, the state, the federal government, and the international community all need to act, and quickly. So make no mistake, these are long odds, and if any of the actors involved fumble their part or miss a cue, the result is doom for my city. The path to survival is narrow, and there are beaucoup awful scenarios in which the region flounders. Take, for example, the big one. The hurricane that overwhelms the water management system, wipes out Miami Beach and all the developments along the Miami River, and destroys the local economy, kicking the torturous process of abandoning South Florida into overdrive. It could hit this year, or maybe next. Or there could be a major financial meltdown, like the Great Recession, which might slow down adaptation and resilience work to the point where the region might not be able to survive even 2 or 3 feet of sea level rise. Or the regional drainage system may not be upgraded quickly enough, rendering multi-million-dollar municipal adaptation efforts moot. Or a regional liquidity crisis precipitated by a sharp increase in flood insurance rates could decrease property values and knock government budgets off course, initiating a positive feedback loop I call the death spiral. That could be them. I call the death spiral, where drops in real estate prices turn into cuts to municipal services and lead to further drops in property prices. Florida is one of the world's top carbon emitters. Also, among that list of things that could have happened, I did not mention a pandemic. I did not foresee that. Florida is one of the world's top carbon emitters, releasing slightly more CO2 into the atmosphere in a year than all of Malaysia, a nation with almost 9 million people, twice the land area, and about a quarter of the per capita GDP. And the perpetually Republican-controlled state legislature may not come around quickly enough to mitigation programs that would reduce the rate of warming and sea level rise. Congress can fail to act. The nations of the world may fail to live up to their climate agreement, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. You get the sense, folks. Miami's path to survival is pretty narrow, and a lot can go wrong. There's a lot of people in this city that are doing it right, as I hope that there are a lot of folks in your city that are doing it right. But one of the reasons why I'm very heartened by these conversations that are occurring by people across the United States is because regional adaptation or municipal adaptation isn't enough, right? States have to be brought online, and the federal government has to be brought online. And so that's a little section from the book. The way I usually do this at this point, even though I know you've got a Q&A coming up, is that I take questions from folks and address them quickly, and then I probably have to call.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you need to make the call, we'll
it's best
get your
to
questions.
Let them stew, usually.
Okay, good. And
yes.
Congratulations, by the way. I look forward to hearing about your article on Rachel Maddow tonight.
I hope so.
And there's a few of us here. Anybody has a question, just unmute and I'll call for the next question. I want to ask you about what are the discussions in Miami about the karst bedrock and how water is going to percolate up through the holy ancient reef that Florida sits upon?
That's a great question. So one of the interesting things about Miami for those, and I'm not sure if I actually touched upon it in that reading, Miami sits on Swiss cheese, right? Or the geological equivalent of Swiss cheese. It's not the kind of soil that it's absolutely permeable, right? Water can come through, water can come up, water can go down. And so in Miami, you're never really more than 2 or 3 or maximum 4 or 5 feet from the water line because it's under you in the limestone. And you can't do the same kind of flooding defense that would make sense in a place like Holland or in New York, right? You can't build dikes, you can't build ditches, you can't build dams. You got to learn how to live with the water. And any infrastructure that you have underground has to, ideally, eventually figure out a way to be floodable. It's one of the major issues that we have with our septic tanks at the moment, which are poisoning the bay. So do we have any solutions for dealing with our karstic limestone? No. There's some ideas of freezing it. There's some ideas of injecting some kind of like plasticine mold into it. I've heard of crazy ideas of like putting 200-foot long concrete walls facing the sea going down all the way to the bedrock to try and stave the water from coming in. It's like, guys, just move, But the deal is there are parts of the city that can be adapted to live with the water. It's not like humans haven't done that before. You just have to have different conceptions of what property means.
Cool. Yeah. And grout injection is something we've done in civil engineering for a long time. Be a lot of grout though. The 200-foot thing, the karst goes below that. So thank you. More questions? You guys just unmute. Go ahead.
I don't hear them.
Well, if somebody's trying to ask, you're muted still.
Okay, maybe I'll ask a question at this point. Mario, you mentioned in one section of your book, there is a section on climate justice. And I wondered if you could, that's a particular concern with many of our club members here and other people as well. And I wonder if you could tell us about a bit about that in terms of your book.
Sure. So Miami, because of the way that it was developed, has a pretty interesting climate justice issue at the moment that we colloquially term here climate gentrification. So Miami, even though it isn't conceived as such, in the popular imagination, is very much a landscape that was created by the development patterns of the Deep South, right? It was a very, very racist place still is actually. But when Miami was being built out, there was a good deal of segregation and redlining that was occurring. And its minorities were kept away from the water, right? So if you were a minority, you were not going to get any kind of lending close to the water. And if you actually look at the Federal Housing Administration lending maps that tell you how many points to give a property if it's next to a minority or how many points to give a property if it floods, they actually used to give more penalties to houses next to minorities than to houses that flooded, right? And so that creates a system where the minorities were all on the high ground, right? They were away from the water on top of a formation known as the Atlantic Coastal Ridge, which is an ancient coral reef that's like, 6 or 7 or 10 feet higher than the surrounding area, not very wide at parts. The problem now is that folks kind of want the high ground and they don't want to share it with the people that got segregated and redlined onto it. And so in Miami, we have some huge mega developments that are going on in the Atlantic Coastal Ridge that are displacing folks from the high ground. And we think that they're being displaced onto the low ground, but we don't have a lot of data on that. And it's led to some pretty serious struggles in the city commission, just because of the sort of racialized nature of this particular development process and the development pattern. I mean, if you can imagine, like, we're talking about low-income single-family neighborhoods, right, where the tallest building is maybe 2 stories, and developers are coming in, buying 15 acres at a time and building 25-story mega developments inside these neighborhoods, and then just, you know, displacing everybody and then wondering why the luxury condos won't sell, right? And so to a certain extent, like Miami does need high density urban developments that are connected by transit on the high ground, but it also needs to figure out how to share the high ground. Because if we displace all of the minorities away from the high ground, I mean, you're just gonna have essentially a city that doesn't work, right? So that's one of the major issues we're having here. Thank you for asking that, Stephen.
Thank you.
A really interesting piece of reverse injustice, historic reverse injustice that's now, of course, being wiped out by gentrification and money. Anybody else have another question for Mario?
Yeah, this is Elaine, one of the Elaines. You said some of the buildings are coming up with plans on how they can adapt. Is it mainly hardscaping stuff? And can you give examples of what they're going to do or are doing?
Sure. So what we're seeing in a lot of the office buildings, and this is partly brought about because of FEMA requiring buildings in certain flood zones to have certain preparations if they're of a certain density, right? But if you're building an office building in like downtown Brickell right now, the bottom floors are going to be floodproof in the sense that like they're floodable and there won't be too much damage if there's flooding. Also, a lot of folks are investing in deployable flood barriers that they can put up in anticipation of a large storm surge, which is one of the big problems here. A storm surge is a big flood that comes with a hurricane. And so, you know, that's a hot business, right? Like selling aluminium to the flood barrier installers is also a very good business at the moment. But you need to do a lot of adaptations to a building, right? Like you need to raise the electrical out of the floodplain. You need to raise the mechanical out of the floodplain, all the gray water, all the black water. You need to make sure that the elevator banks are designed in such a way that, you know, if a big 25-foot storm surge comes through the center of town, you know, they're still going to be functional. You got to make sure that, you know, all the buildings here have backup generators. Most of them do. What height is that generator set to?
Wow.
Right. And so if you're a condominium that was built in the 70s, right, here we have these things called condo associations. They're regulated by state law. They're a juridical body. It's like a corporation. But like, you know, if you're a condo association that doesn't have a lot of cash, are you going to be able, and it's an old condo, right? And like everybody who lives there is kind of a senior. It's a naturally retirement community or something like that. And everybody just enjoys their nice life on the beach. Are you going to be able to raise enough cash to adapt your building? All right, is somebody going to step in and lend you that cash to adapt the building? These are huge questions because when the buildings aren't adapted and there's a storm event, what you end up is with socialized risk, right? Because who's going to have to pay for the condemnation of that building? The city. Who's going to have to eventually like shoulder the burden or the cost of dealing with a building that, or a condo building that has to like have to be administratively dissolved and can't be taken care of? The city, the citizens. So that risk is all being socialized at the moment. And by like that risk, I mean like, I think we've had 20,000 condo units come online in the past 20 years. It's just a massive construction.
It's amazing stuff. I've done a lot of flood proofing of old buildings that are now in the floodplain. Generator rooms on the ground floor, basement, elevators, 3 stories underground parking. You know, that just doesn't work anymore. So what time for one more question, then we need to let you get to the governor's office. If anybody has another.
I have one.
Thank
Some
Bob.
of the states along the eastern seaboard have had state legislatures who blocked any studies to show sea level rise to protect their real estate developers along the coast. Has that happened in Florida?
So the Scott administration, which was the former administration, was much more averse to open discussions of reality than the current administration. During this particular administration, in this particular Florida Congress, there was actually a bill passed last session that mandated that all coastal construction had to include what is called a vulnerability study, right? Which means that if you're building a new building, you have to do the math and crunch the numbers and figure out, well, according to scientifically available sea level rise projections or climate change projections, how vulnerable is this building going to be? And you have to build it to a certain point of resilience, right, and survivability. So that was a huge deal, passed by a Republican and a Democrat, a Republican in the Florida House, Vance Lupus, and a Democrat in the Senate, Jose Javier Rodriguez. So there's been some forward movement, and that's having reverberating effects because it affects not just private property, but public infrastructure, and you know, like there's grumbling at the Department of Transportation, like, oh, what do you mean? We have to build our roads now so they don't flood. Yeah, dudes. So that's what's going on now. Where you're mainly seeing a lot of pushback on discussions of sea level rise or climate risk is disclosure of that climate risk in real estate transactions, at least in Florida, right? Real estate is a huge business in Florida. It is like the second most important business in the South Florida economy, but you don't have to tell the person who's buying your property just how recently it was a swamp, or how, you know, a few years it may have before it returns to being a swamp again, or how often it turns into swamp, right? The market is doing a little bit of a job in disclosing that risk. There are modelers who are trying to make sure that every time you purchase a property online, you understand the flood risk. You know, Redfin is doing that, Zillow is doing that. But the Florida Realtors Association has successfully blocked the implementation of such disclosures into the addenda that need to follow real estate contracts here. So that's kind of like where it's at right now.
Cool.
Excuse me.
Yes.
On that point, just want to mention that, yeah, Jody and I have been working at the Hawaii State Legislature for 3 years, trying to get disclosure statements required. You know, state law does require identification of significant properties at significant risk. Each time they work their way through all the committees. They go into everything finally goes to the legal graveyard of the financial committees. And the disclosure bills never come out. Sort of, they're stabbed, you know, it's 13 daggers and no fingerprints left. But it is the real estate industry that kills them each time. But yeah, so we've tried for 3 years to get that in Hawaii, and so far been unsuccessful. We'll probably try again next year.
if I was Chris Flavelle at the New York Times, he's the one who covers this stuff for them, I would do an article about realtors associations across the country fighting against the disclosure of flood risk in low-lying states and fire risk in states like California. And I think it would be a fascinating investigative piece to do. I obviously don't have the time to pitch it because I have to go and do an election disinformation story by this weekend. Yeah, no, you raise an interesting question, is like, is this being coordinated on a national level? And at what point does the tide against their interests turn? So absolutely.
Mario, wonderful way to kick this webinar off.
Thank you.
We would love to have you back for discussion at 4 if your governor's office duties allow.
I'll see what I can do. No promises. Depends on how angry they are with the story. I think I got all my facts straight, so it may be a short conversation, but you never know. Sometimes you have to let people vent. But I will let you guys know, yeah?
Please
Yeah,
let Stephen know, and he will let the rest of the group know. This is exciting, and really hope to hear about your article on Rachel tonight.
I hope so. Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone. Can you
Thank you.
unmute and let's give Mario a round of applause? Woohoo!
Thank you, Mario.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thank you.
All
Have a
right.
great day, folks.
See you at 4 if you can. Otherwise, thank you very
I'm
much.
going to try. If not, thank you very much.
You're
All
welcome.
right. Okay, gang. Let's see. I am next. And let's see. There's my share. Oh, but I don't need to go that. If I start talking and I'm not actually sharing, y'all make sure somebody tells me to hit the last share button. I always forget that last share button. And I've got link on my desktop. Now let me open it. Let's see. Padre Island sea level rise. Now go back to you guys. And you are, where'd you go? There you are. Right there. Now go back to the big screen, do the share thing. That one's it. Click the last button. Can y'all see my share?
Yay. Yes, definitely.
All righty then. Bruce Melton, I am the director of the oldest independent climate science organization in the world. Got a whole lot of stuff on climate discovery. I've written a lot about it, science guy, involved in new National Sierra Club policy. Plus I'm a civil engineer. What I want to talk about today is what's going on most of our coast. We got over 2,000 miles of barrier islands on the east and Gulf Coast, and they all behave similarly. They're all disappearing. This is Padre Island. I've done a lot of film work and reporting on beach and dune erosion on Padre from normal sunny day high tides. And this is Padre. They have a found item artist, anonymous artist that goes way up the wild beach and creates these wonderful pieces of art. It's a beautiful place. There's a lot of loose blowing sand on Padre, on South Padre. Here's this description. We're going to give you guys links to all of our presentations. So there's extra stuff in my presentations, at least, that can fill you out, links to a lot of the science that I'm talking about. But most of the work I've done has been here on South Padre, and you go down south on Padre Island National Seashore. Can y'all see my mouse?
Yeah.
It's 65 miles of wild beach. It starts about right here. 4-wheel drive only, incredible place. It's the island is bisected in the middle by a boat pass that goes to this little bitty place called Port Mansfield. 1984, I grew up on the coast, and when I got out of college, one of the things that we would do is go down to Padre and hang around for a week or 2 or 3. And this is one of our camps back when there was a big beach. And when I met my wife, we continued the tradition. This is a place that's 7 miles past the 4-wheel drive only sign. Look at how big this beach is. This is a normal high tide line I'm standing on. You drive down on the low water or the below the high water mark on the packed sand, and then you pull up into the soft sand. It's just two-wheel drive vehicle. You pull up into the soft sand, and you don't have very far to dig out if you get stuck. So we would go down there all the time and camp. This is one of my favorite places. Look how big this beach is. Am I going in the right direction? Big beach, big beach.
Yeah.
2003, still a big beach. This is the old Suburban. I do drive a Suburban. I used to have a town car, but I'm a nonprofit director. I don't have any money, so I'm a wilderness filmmaker. I need a wilderness vehicle. This is 59 miles past the 4-wheel drive sign. It used to be when there was a beach and the sand got dry, it was murder. It literally, you could not get 60 miles of 4-wheel drive in one day. You'd have to stop somewhere and camp. Big Beach, 2005. This is a place called the Big Dune. And this is a quick series from the same spot, 2003, 2009, 2013. Where's the beach going? 2014. Low tide, 2017. This is low tide. These are all non-storm conditions, but they're mostly, well, actually since 2013, this is during king tide season. And you can see this is actually not our camp. I just dropped by these folks' camp. It's a wonderful camping spot. Big Dune, it's the biggest dune for miles. It sticks up like a sand volcano. But this one 2013 was the first year that the beach was closed because of non-storm high water at the National Seashore ever. So this is what it looks like now. This is on South Padre.
Whoa.
Beach is completely gone. This happens 53 times, or it happened 53 times between May 2018, June 2018 and May 2019. This is actual dune erosion happening. See this characteristic slope here? This is called the angle of repose. All materials have a shear angle where their own weight will cause failure. The sand on South Padre, you see this very characteristic shear angle. What happens is the surf erodes out from underneath the bottom of the dune, and then these big blocks slide down. They're called, or at least I call them dunebergs. This is back up. I was just here somewhere when I took that picture. Back up a little bit, and you can see on the left here, there's no dunes left. Literally, the dunes have been eroded away. So what happens is, this is, say, back around the turn of the century before we started getting beach erosion. There's this back beach that has always existed. And now with sea level rise, the beach has been pulled out into the deeper water by ever increasing rates of sea level rise. And this was what was happening about 2013. Today, you can see the dunes are all eroded away, got lots more pictures. So now we're actively eroding into the dunes. The beach is gone, and this will continue until we lower the sea level rise rate below the beach erosion threshold. You see here we are, dunes eroding. Actually, most of the dunes in this stretch are gone. You can see way down here, there's a big old dune. The black sand, this is magnetite. It's a common component of beach sand, very small amount, fraction of a percent, or in the 1% range, probably a fraction of a percent. It's heavier, it's made out of iron. It's heavier than silica sand and the other feldspars and things that you might find in beach sand. And so it gets left behind when the surf pulls the silica sand out. And so now our white beaches on Padre are turning into black beaches. You see some more of the magnetite here. And here's some strata that was in this wall right here. You can see them right down here. This is what it looks like now. This is actually low tide. One of the king tides is driving through the surf. Not every time I get down there do I have to drive through the surf, because it's difficult, notoriously hard to see, and even harder to photograph. It's only high tide a couple of hours every day. Half the time it's night. In the mornings it's cloudy and it makes for really bad pictures. And then 5 days out of 7, it's not the weekend. And most of us don't get down there most of the time, including me. So it's a really difficult thing to actually catch. Many, if not, well, most, approaching a vast majority of the locals that I meet down here, they see my big cameras and stuff and they stop and talk. And they have no idea what's going on because they don't have this long-term history. Plus these king tides so seldomly get up into the dunes relatively, even though 53 times, 2018 to 2019, we had these erosion levels where the only way you can get down the beach is drive in the water. Don't do this, by the way. Your mechanic will hate you or love you. Thousands of dollars. Killed a transmission one time. Golly, it sucked water into the breather on top of the transmission. Sandy water. There was sand all on top of the transmission. It was sad. Fortunately, it failed slowly. this is 2013. This is the very first time the beach had been closed. I camped, this is Padre Island National Seashore. I camped at the campsite, or I camped at the parking lot of the headquarters because the beach was closed. The next day they opened the beach up, but the tide was still super high. So there's not any erosion on the dunes right here because it's 2013. Still a beautiful place. It will always be a beautiful place, somewhat. So natural subsidence involved. What about sand starvation? There's always subsidence in areas where there's sediment, which or where barrier islands are. It simply compacts on its own weight. Sand starvation is a big deal, but most of our sand starvation was blocked off 50 years ago, or stopped 50 years ago, or since 50 years ago when we closed our last big dams on the Texas coast. It's similar. A lot of dam sites, they've all been built out 50 years ago. So we've got this new equilibrium, or we had this new equilibrium until the turn of the century, 2010, 2013, when we really started seeing rapid sea level rise that started overwhelming a barrier island's natural ability to regenerate. And it's this geomorphic dynamics. Barrier islands are some of, if not the most rapid and capable self-repairing environments on the planet, except when you pass the beach erosion threshold. So if it wasn't for warming and that extra bit of sea level rise, we've always had a little bit of sea level rise in recent prehistoric times, but our beaches have been able to self-repair. Especially, you see it every time after a hurricane, it blows the sand dunes out. And then, the following year, the sand dunes are, shoulder high. And then after that, they're overhead. It just rebuilds so rapidly until you pass the beach regeneration threshold of about 7 millimeters per year. Average global sea level rise, long-term average, very important. There's a really biasing bit of science going on with sea level rise. Generally, they use the entire tide gauge record, which almost all the gauges are over 50 years old. Many are 100 years old. It really biases a recent trend. So the deal is average sea level rise versus recent trends versus high tides. Now, high tides, and if y'all have never seen a hammerhead, golly, they're incredible. Recent sea level rise. A couple of really important reports came out in 2017. NOAA's report calls for 14 inches of sea level rise by 2030. They include ice sheet collapse. The big deal with the less than 2 feet of sea level rise that we've been hearing by 2100 now for over 20 years is that's consensus science. They do not take ice sheet collapse into consideration because it is not modelable to any robust extent yet, or at least until very recently. In 2017, there was enough work that NOAA thought that it was important enough and it was robust enough that they could start talking about it. 14 inches of sea level rise by 2030. When we get to that much sea level rise, sunny day high tide flooding, like I've showed you with the beach erosion, gets up just a little bit higher and it gets above that beach ramp and you get into the flat coastal plains. So you get this extremely far inward extension of normal sunny day high tide flooding. That's when, once we reach this 14-inch mark, that's when the sunny day high tide flooding increases by 25 times. And it will make the 5-year occurrence of sunny day flooding the 2.5-month occurrence. And it will create a level of chronic nuisance flooding, that creates resource abandonment. And that is when we start to get into the really significant economic impacts of sea level rise. And it's not sea level rise. We're not going to drown. It's not inundation. It's the economic impacts of all the infrastructure. Mario talked about this a lot. Mm-hmm. That is what's going to take us out. It will create unrecoverable economic scenarios globally. Here's just interesting science stuff. This is where our tides are today in the red. This is the king tide period. This is actually, I think I've got a picture here in a minute. Yeah, this is one period when I was down there filming. And you can see each day's oscillation between the high and low tide. The reason it's everything is higher than the blue is modeled. Modeled is based on sea level datum, which is in the late 20th century. I forget exactly, the 80s, maybe up into the 90s, but it's a 19-year period where historically we have determined that's what sea level is. And they haven't changed it since the 80s, something like that. So our modeling is still, it's always, even when we're not in these king tide periods, look, it's a half a foot or more, current tides are half a foot or more where the modeling says it's supposed to be, because it's based on stuff last century before our climate changed. This is just smoothed out. It shows you the king tide period. There's two periods, one in October and one in May, when the sun and moon align just right. Instead of just the moon running around the planet pulling the tides, it's the sun and the moon pulling the tides. So you get an extra 25 to 50% on top of your high tide. Just a question to the angels: where will the shorebirds go when there's no more shore? Hopefully there will always be a little bit of shore, and we'll have a place for the shorebirds. Very important. Interesting quote here to go with this pretty scary coyote picture eating a piece of somebody's Sunday watermelon. The sediment exchanges between the beach and the dune environments are governed by complex feedbacks. You know, we all know what those are. They may have important repercussions for the evolution of the beach dune systems. That is our 7 millimeter per rise beach erosion, beach disintegration threshold. There's 2,300 miles of barrier islands. This is a black morph trifoliate heron, just a gorgeous bird. This is a classic laughing gull. So the barrier island disintegration threshold, what it does is, like those pictures I was showing earlier of beach erosion into dune erosion. Once the dunes are gone, then the barrier island actually starts to disintegrate. Storm surge and beach washover really accelerates this process. Once you get above the 7 millimeter per rise, 7 millimeter per year sea level rise, those beach washovers and the cuts that go through the barrier islands after storms, they won't heal back, or they'll heal back very slowly. And therefore the process of this barrier island disintegration begins. The long-term average on Padre is 5.2 millimeters per year. And there won't be a pop quiz. I'll give you guys a break. So here is what's going on with recent sea level rise. I've got 4 or 5 gauges here. This is the long-term, see the straight lines. The red line is the linear interpolation. The black lines are the error bars, basically, the confidence limits. They use a straight line determination. That worked really well up until about 2010, when we moved into the next phase of sea level rise, which is where we start getting ice sheet disintegration. And this recent trend is just anecdotal. Visually, it's about 10 millimeters per year. It's beyond the beach disintegration threshold, and we see the results now. That science apparently was pretty good. Here we are at Corpus Christi, Rockport. I think I skipped one. Port Mansfield, same thing. All of the red arrows are doing almost exactly the same thing. And this is Port Isabel. I just wanted to show y'all, those previous images were up to 2018, and here's 2019. The trend continues. And Mario mentioned this, we're not going back. We can slow the rate. Hopefully we can slow the rate back to historic levels, but we're not going back. This is one of the really dangerous things about sea level rise, is that once we got it, we've got to go back into an ice age to start losing sea level rise. And that probably would be as bad or worse than global warming. So we just need to stop it. That's all we've got to do. And really important things about stopping it. This new technical report number 92 from NOAA. Sea level rise is accelerating. We're seeing flooding happening today that decades ago only happened during hurricanes. Now it's being caused by a full moon or prevailing winds or current changes. You get a big south wind, and all of a sudden you got water in the streets of Miami. The water has just started coming into the streets of South Padre. Just not very much, few inches. But, you know, that was before last year. Last year, the astonishing thing about this, and I talked with his name's not here, William Sweet is the author, the lead author at NOAA at this report. I talked to him about this. 2018 to 2019, average across all of the NOAA stations, 48 tide gauges, the lower 48. Average sea level rise was 1.5 inches. That's 38 millimeters. The normal average global sea level long-term rise is 3.5 millimeters per year. 38 millimeters per year was what NOAA measured. Average U.S. lower 48, 2018 to 2019. It broke the old record by an inch. It's just an astonishing thing to happen. And there's lots of you can see here's there's lots of monthly variation, and you add that up to the even more annual variation. But the astonishing thing is that it was 3 times the old record, and 38 millimeters per year, and it's, you know, it's continuing to grow. So here's just an explanation of those 53 days of high tides that were enough to erode the dunes. This was not a particularly high king tide. This is the day I was there, the time I was there. It was 1.85 feet above mean lowest low water, which is the lowest low tide of the day. 53 times the yellow here, 53 times, I believe, 53 times. June 2018 to May 2019, the erosion was into the dunes. There it is. This is that 1.85 feet. This is that 2:14 p.m. time on May the 23rd that I just showed y'all. That right there, that tide, 1.85 feet. That's here, 1.85 feet. And you see it runs all the way up to the dunes. It's not, there's a little bit of erosion here. I think this is erosion that happened this day from wave run up, but it's not those, you know, 3 foot, 8 foot, 18 foot tall erosion scarps that I was showing in the other pictures. So we've got big deal going on. We've got a lot more sea level rise. We've already got disintegrating barrier islands. The beach protects the dunes protect the barrier island protects the mainland. It's halfway through the process. We will soon start disintegrating the barrier islands, and that's our safety net for 2,300 miles of Gulf and U.S. East Coast. Now, the economic parts of it. This is Jevra Jeva in 2018, and 1.5C and 2C warming, 1.5C, $10.2 trillion a year at 2100 with 20 inches of sea level rise. At 2C with 34 inches of sea level rise at 2100, it's 14 trillion per year. And that's RCP 8.5, that's worst case scenario. They modeled one more worst case, 71 inches, which is double RCP 8.5, 71 inches, 1.8 meters, 27 trillion per year. This was a relatively simple modeling. Carezi, this year, July, they went to much more intricate lengths in their costing of sea level rise. They say 10 to 20 inches by 2050 to 2080, which is RCP 8.5, 14.2 trillion per year. Now here, this is the deal. RCP 8.5, that's based on sea level rise. It does not have ice sheet collapse. When you look at sea level rise with ice sheet collapse, sorry about that, which is that NOAA William Sweet 2017 report that says 14 inches by 2030. So what is it, 14 inches by 2030 or 10 to 20 inches by 2050 to 2080? It's probably more than 14 inches by 2030 because climate science is very understated. We know that ice sheets are collapsing. Based on what science there is out there, NOAA decided 14 inches by 2030, worst case. But remember, where we are with impacts on climate science right now, which the vast majority, almost all of them, are proceeding ahead generations to a century or more ahead of projections. So we've got to evaluate for worst case. And I need to check my time. I am good until 3:05. I'm 5 minutes over, running about 10 minutes late. I'm getting pretty close. So this is South Padre, 2018. Couldn't get down there this year, COVID. Wife's got complicating factors. Not about to go expose her to anything. So 2018 is all I got. I mean, 2019, I guess 2018. These guys are driving in the surf because there is no more beach. See the dunes back here? The tourists are backed up against the dunes. They're driving in the surf because they have to. There's been a number of articles about all these little cars that have gotten killed because driving through the surf, they get stuck. They ingest water into their engines. And, you know, like my mechanic told me, he says, dude, don't do that. I said, well, how am I going to film climate change? Here's another. This is a dry sand. You can see this day. These guys down here, that's that RV. They're in the splash zone. They're in the swash zone. The highest waves are running up underneath these guys. And again, this is that same trip where 1.85, where the water was splashing up underneath my my Suburban when I was running the drone. You can see right here. Here's the high water mark where the highest wave is washed up. Here we go, another picture of it. And it's big cameras down on the beach. People always like people taking pictures. So let's see, just a few more killer pictures. Padre Island National Seashore, more Padre Island National Seashore. This is South Padre Island. This is actually one of the last remnants of beach on South Padre. I got a couple of pictures of it. Here's another one. This is gone now. The surf is into the dunes now, all along South Padre and most of North Padre. Here's that angle of repose again, where the surf washes the toe of the dune out and then dunebergs slide down. The duneberg has been completely washed away here, but the scar remains. You see here's another dune down there, but you know, where are the dunes? They have been washed away. Black sand. Black sand, it kind of works like, if you guys know about gold mining, black sand accumulates in the lowest energy areas. And so for some reason, there's a low energy area here that's accumulated all this black sand. Drones are cool. Okay, I think this is my last slide. This is kind of a mirage. Actually, it is a mirage. You can see at the base of the wind generators, the mirage-y looking stuff here. And what a mirage will do is it will throw the foreground up higher. So this is actually, we're looking across the Laguna Madre, which is behind Padre Island. And on the mainland, on the King Ranch, are thousands of wind generators. And this used to actually, much of this used to be sand flats, just a couple of inches above sea level. But because the Laguna Madre is a hypersaline estuary, it only has 3 outlets to the Gulf of Mexico in 119 miles or something like that, however long it is. And so there is a very low tide range, probably about an inch. And so these sand flats where all this water is now, were only exposed during periods of really high rainfall or when you get storm surge that blast water over the barrier island into the laguna and fills it up. So they're gone now because, you know, the king tides, they put water in there periodically, and a little in, it's hard to get out when you've got these series of king tides coming over this 4 to 6 week period. So it literally fills up the Laguna Madre, and it won't drain out for a month or two, and it floods the sand flats. The sand flats are completely gone. Makes for a really interesting picture with the mirage. And, oh, sorry, I did not, there it is, my final image. Beautiful place still. Get down there while you can. It will remain beautiful, but it will be very hard to get down the beach when the barrier island is cut up into lots and lots of uninhabited little islands. And that's mine. And so we will do questions during our question and answer period. And now I want to unshare. And Dave, are you ready?
I am ready.
If you would share, your image has disappeared, which I think means that you might not be able to. Nope, you're sharing. Good deal.
Okay.
Take off. And we
Just a second
are
here.
10 minutes behind. It's about right.
Okay. Yeah, my topic is how we adapt, provide resilience. Just a second. I'm going to get you out of there. And restore. And I'll be reading a lot of my text because we do have the folks that are on by phone. Overall, Sierra Club tackles climate change by mutually supportive strategies of mitigation, adaptation, and carbon dioxide removal, CDR, within an overall framework of climate justice and equity, and an understanding that plans will need to be revised regularly and strategies altered as climate impact projections are revised. It's a little diagram here. There's mitigation, adaptation, CDR, all within the overall overarching framework of climate justice and equity. Suggested in the diagram, the strategies are interrelated. Mitigation strategies help reduce the amount of adaptation required. Carbon dioxide removal is a form of mitigation and a very necessary one, given that even if we reduce emissions dramatically, we got to get rid of the stuff that's already out there, or reduce it anyway. Then adaptation strategies are tailored ideally to complement mitigation and carbon dioxide removal. Adaptation also is a key means for promoting resiliency. So we're going to focus primarily on the adaptation, and that refers to actions that lessen the impacts of climate change or protect people and nature from those impacts. Climate resilience, or the ability of communities to predict, prepare, and respond to climate change in a positive manner, may be used interchangeably with adaptation, or at least they're very complementary. It's interesting. These are definitions of 4 major types of adaptation strategies that come from the Southeast Florida Climate Compact. And those were the Southeast Florida counties that included Miami, the Keys, Fort Lauderdale, and that area, and then Loxahatchee to the north. So it's back in 2014, they were really ahead of the curve on studying how you could do adaptation. But I think a lot of what they were trying to do ends up getting blocked when you get into the planning commissions and the people that can do thumbs up and thumbs down. But nonetheless, they were really pretty much ahead of the curve on a lot of this. So they are avoid, excuse me, managed retreat, accommodation, and protection. Avoid is sort of the ideal situation. You avoid the need for adaptation in the first place. And this is pretty much by making sure that development does not take place in areas subject to coastal hazards associated with sea level rise, or where the risk is low at present will increase over time. So it means that you have to go through this vulnerability analysis with the sea level rise viewers that NOAA provides, and other tools to identify the vulnerable areas. And then you want to identify areas where you don't want to have, you want to forestall development that might have otherwise taken place in these risky areas. An example is in the kind of northern part of Florida, small town called Yankeetown, Florida. But they were on this river. They were getting coastal inundation due to sea level rise, and it was killing off large areas of their coastal forests and causing salt marshes to migrate in and creating what they call ghost forests. Interesting, Florida did have a pretty good law that got passed somehow that allows local areas to designate adaptation action areas to manage development. That's a really good concept. It's not like a zoning overlay. It's like identify these areas that go beyond the normal type of zoning to specifically take into account their vulnerability. So Yankeetown took advantage of that, and they declared about 85% of their town as natural resource adaptation action area. Then within that, there's the strictest level of protection, which are the resource protection areas. And that's where the city zones it to restrict development of parks, natural areas, marshes, wetlands, other types of non-residential open space. So you never put structures there that are going to require adaptation or protection in the future. You're ahead of the curve with this avoid strategy. Managed retreat, or ideally you want just natural retreat. And the sad thing is with what Bruce was showing us, is here was a natural seashore. You would think that as the sea level goes up, the beach can naturally go inland, but in that case, they began encountering dunes that sort of acted as, in a way, as revetments or seawalls, and to some extent. But where that is, in most instances, the coast is heavily developed, and a lot of times when you would want the beach to come naturally inland, it runs into residences, coastal highways, and other barriers, where as sea level rises, if you're really, in order to accommodate it, you have to do a planned retreat to move people out of there and demolish the structures and allow the beaches to come in where they naturally should have been able to come in the first place. Bruce and others, JC, worked, developed a very comprehensive climate resilience policy that guides, provides a lot of guidance on how, when, and where to recommend managed retreat, especially taking into account the impacts on low income and minority groups. A couple of examples. One of them, interestingly, was developed by a tribal group in Northwest Washington State, the Quinault Indian Nation. In 2017, they came up with the Tahola Village Relocation Master Plan, and we'll talk about that one. But the goal of managed retreat is to proactively move people, structures, and infrastructure out of harm's way, ideally before disasters occur or other threats occur, so that you avoid damage, maximize benefits, and minimize costs for communities and ecosystems. So the village relocation, the area on the right that's kind of a big triangular area is the area that's currently vulnerable to sea level rise and flooding from the adjacent river. And there's about 660 people in the village, 175 homes, schools, a lot of very important services. This is their relocation master plan. In the foreground, the lower part is the existing community, pretty much at sea level, and then raised up in the upper area is where they're going to be relocated. And the plan implementation is now underway with the first building and early education and senior program to be completed by the end of the year. So they're moving along, although I understand that and they're awaiting some funding, additional funding for carrying out some of the other aspects of the plan. Managed retreat also, ideally you want it to occur proactively, but truth is that in a lot of instances, it's been after the fact, where after there's a disaster, then FEMA funding kicks in with post-disaster relief. And FEMA has recognized that there are many areas where it just doesn't make sense to subsidize rebuilding in exactly the same area. So one of the key tools when there's money available to do it is through buyouts. And that's where you purchase, you get people to voluntarily sell their property. In New York, it was done with FEMA funding, FEMA post-disaster relief funds, plus augmented with New York City funds. It was a very generous buyout program where they offered people the value of their homes before the damage. The current value would be much lower because of the damage, but it was an attractive package, and they were able to relocate about 300 of the homes. Managed retreat proactively is a challenge because it's hard to get the funding for doing so, but there's a whole group that's studying managed retreat in particular, including looking for creative ways to fund it. One thing that makes that possible is that sea level rise and the impacts don't happen overnight. It's a progressive thing, starting with the king tides and stuff, and then over a period of years, the sea level rises impacts become have more impact on the structures. But in a lot of instances, people may still be able to stay in their residences for 20 years or so, while accumulating funds to retreat, to fund the retreat when it becomes absolutely necessary. Accommodation is the next level. That's where you say, okay, for whatever reasons, we're going to choose to allow people to stay in flood areas and areas prone to sea level rise, but we're going to do adaptation strategies for doing accommodation strategies. Key one that we heard some discussion from Mario is the elevation of structures or stormwater improvements that allows the structure of an infrastructure system to stay intact. So it doesn't prevent floods. So rather than preventing flooding or inundation, these strategies aim to reduce potential risks. Here's an example of South Carolina, on the South Carolina coast, very typical, where the house either was designed initially this way or subsequently elevated so that the first the flooding can come in beneath the house. Other instances, you may still have a ground level, but you move all the important stuff out of there and allow for it to flood occasionally as you have to. Some of the other measures that Bruce has mentioned is the use of flood-resistant building materials, other architectural measures to avoid or reduce the floodwater impacts on the structures. But elevation is very important. In the social equity issue, what happened in the 9th Ward of New Orleans, which is a predominantly Black and immigrant community where it's a tight-knit community. Our Marine Action Team visited down there and spent some time with the folks. They elected to rebuild their houses that had been hit by Sandy, I think it was, anyway, Katrina, maybe Katrina, that they elected to stay in place, but elevate all their cabins by 4 feet, 3 to 4 feet. And also they still are reliant on a large levee to protect them also. Finally, the sort of the hardcore protection is the last one. It's sometimes they may be unavoidable, where we're talking about sewage, water treatment systems, municipal power plants, like areas like downtown Honolulu, where you really have to look at protection. But still, they have hard and soft approaches for doing so, where you're trying to mitigate the impacts of rising seas or storm surges and things to decrease the vulnerability, but you're going to allow those structures and the infrastructure to pretty much remain unaltered in place. Soft protection strategies, where feasible, use nature-based approaches such as living shorelines. Sierra Club's resilience policy gives high priority to nature-based strategies and making sure that they promote climate justice and equity. Hard strategies employ structural elements such as seawalls, revetments, and levees. Talk a little bit about living shorelines as a soft protection device. It's a broad term based on the nature-based approaches to stabilize a shoreline in suitable environments, those that are relatively low wave impact areas. Living shorelines can be used instead of seawalls or bulkheads to reduce erosion and protect property. Living shoreline projects are made up of mostly natural materials such as native wetland vegetation, natural fiber logs, oyster reef breakwaters are quite popular in some areas. But the whole goal is to maintain a natural look to the shoreline while you're also offering some protection. An example of this is a marsh sill project. I think that's Chesapeake Bay, I think, where that is. Anyway, you see there's a diagram on the right-hand side. There's almost like a artificial reef that's been built out in the water some distance offshore. And it's underwater in high tide, but portions of it will stick out in low tide to protect the upland areas and ideally to allow the area in between to stay protected and even expand. Oh, excuse me, went the wrong way. There's a before and after picture of a marsh sill project at Chesapeake Bay, Virginia. So on the left side, on the before part, you can see these kind of natural rock formation out there, basically providing, looks like sort of a dam. And then 15 years later, there's nice thick grass all the way up to that breakwater that had been underwater 15 years earlier. So it's protected the inland area, actually expanded, instead of shoreline migrating inward, the shoreline is sort of migrated outwards, and they actually gain some land, but a very natural look to it, and provides, preserves the natural area. Seawalls are very widespread in use. There's one in East Honolulu, not far from where I live. And you know, the big problem with seawalls is the beaches narrow or disappear over time because as the sea level rises, the beaches can no longer follow, migrate inland. They run into the seawall. And so we've lost about 70% of the beaches on Oahu over the years because of seawalls were widely used back in the 70s and 80s. A lot of them still grandfathered in. So it's a challenge. State policy now is to avoid hardening of the seawall, hardening of the coast, and we're looking at ways to dismantle some of the existing ones where possible. Revetments are another hard protection way, form of protecting the coastal areas. They're on the shoreline themselves, used to protect shorelines from erosion caused by wave action, typically made of rocks, concrete blocks, and similar hard materials. Here's an example of a rock revetment on South Carolina coast. It's by Western Carolina University Program for Study of Developed Shorelines. It's interesting program there. We met with some of the folks there when our Marine team was in North Carolina, but they specifically study the harm that's being done by hard protection and explore ways of or softer approaches to it. Levees are another very widely used form of hard protection, basically trying to tame the Mississippi River and all the way full extent of it, the Missouri River and some of the others. But New Orleans in particular is heavily dependent on levee systems because New Orleans is below sea level. But the problem with levees is when there's a breach in them, you can get severe flooding, and that happens fairly often. In this instance, there's a aerial photograph showing a breach in the wall of the 17th Street Canal levee, which happened in Hurricane Katrina, 2005. So you can see the big hole in the levee and flooding in the adjacent area. Okay, resilience. So how can we achieve community resilience to these climate change impacts? Well, they include developing policies, plans, and programs to avoid or reduce climate change impacts, hazard management plans, including pre and post-disaster plans, and the adaptation strategies that we've been discussing. Hazard mitigation plans, these are very important. I think Mario touched on some of this earlier. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, of course, provides federal assistance to states and communities experiencing major disasters, such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. But to be eligible for FEMA assistance, states and local governments must develop and update hazard mitigation plans. I mean, FEMA is smart enough to say, hey, we don't want to just keep funding. We want to try to control the amount that we have to spend on these disaster recovery things. Here's three examples. The state of Hawaii's hazard mitigation plan, which I've studied. There's the state of Florida's, state of North Carolina. These are the covers. There's typical. Every state's going to have these. They're very, very extensive. I think Hawaii's is approaching 1,000 pages in length. But they look at 4 different phases of emergency management. starting with mitigation and preparedness. So that's where you try to act ahead of time to reduce the impacts. Then there's the response, is what's happening during the event itself. And of course, we've seen a lot of examples of the response phase just in recent months with all the hurricanes and flooding that we've seen, especially throughout the Southeast. Then there's the recovery phase, rebuilding after the emergency. The mitigation phase is pretty much actions to prevent or reduce the cause, impact, or consequences of disasters. These include implementing nature-based soft protection strategies, such as living shorelines, or when that's not feasible, constructing levees, flood walls, or permanent barriers to control flooding. Another protection, soft protection that I should mention is beach nourishment. That's where you either pump sand that's going offshore, bring it back onshore, which is what we do in Honolulu, or you bring it from some other site and sort of rebuild the beach. You can do that. You can buy some time doing that, but eventually with sea level rise, that's no longer feasible. And then there's the other one, as we mentioned, constructing levees or flood walls, other barriers to control flooding, and then purchasing flood protection insurance. Preparedness phase includes planning, training, and educational activities for events that cannot be mitigated. Some of the examples of preparedness include designation and stocking of hurricane, flood, and tsunami shelters, support for shelter-in-place options, and voluntary and mandatory evacuation planning, including evacuation of low-income individuals lacking transportation. In some of the earlier hurricanes, some low-income people were stranded because the FEMA people forgot that they don't have, some of them don't have cars, and they're not bus systems. Another thing about this, I've looked at Hawaii's. It includes other things like stationing, installing backup generators throughout the state, because we're relying on a central power system. And if that goes down, in order to still keep our water, being able to pump the water up to the reservoirs, there's a bunch of auxiliary diesel backup generators to power those things. So a lot of very, very detailed planning that's laid out ahead of time where they go through scenarios. Like in our case, we were looking at Category 4 hurricane coming up to the whole island chain and what the impacts of that would be, including being cut off from diesel fuel for maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Response phase is, okay, that's while it's happening. And of course, obviously business and other operations don't function normally at that time. Big emphasis on personal safety and well-being and in the emergency. And, a lot of this, rescuing people who are stuck on the top floor of their houses. So this goes on through the duration of the amount of effectiveness of this depends on the level of preparedness in the first place. Some examples include implementing their disaster response plans, conducting search and rescue missions, and individuals taking action to protect themselves and their pets and livestock, and addressing the public concerns about food safety. Recovery phase often includes FEMA disaster relief funding, which can facilitate buyouts, relocation, managed retreat, and other activities for adapting to current and projected climate impacts, rather than simply rebuilding in place. There is sort of a widespread idea. Resiliency means stubbornly going back to the place where you've been for your decades and just rebuilding and getting wiped out again. So post-disaster recovery plan, that's in place so that after the event goes, you have a plan that you're working from. You're not just starting from scratch at that point. Some example of recovery activities include preventing or reducing stress-related illnesses and excessive financial burdens, rebuilding damaged structures based on advanced knowledge obtained from the preceding disasters and post-disaster recovery plans. Another, we've talked about, one of the big meta goals of our efforts are to restore. And we talk about restoration in two ways. First, actually restoring the climate to a sustainable level which avoids tipping points to the extent we can still do that. And to do so, we must vigorously pursue mitigation and carbon dioxide removal as needed. Ideally, and Bruce has been a strong advocate for this, as needed to reduce global warming to a maximum of 1 degree centigrade above historic levels, going beyond the 1.5 degree that is kind of widespread as a goal. Of course, we're far away from doing that yet, but that's a very important element of that. To the extent you do this, you make your adaptation much easier. And then finally, we can't go back and restore ecosystems as they were in 1968 or so, because the ecosystems are changing with global warming, and they're moving northward by and large. But what we want to do is restore where they're damaged and maintain the ecosystem services that ecosystems provide so as they're adapting to climate impacts. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the question and answer period.
Thank you, Dave. Big round of applause for Dave, everybody.
Hey, thank you.
That's
Thank you, Dave. Yep.
Sure.
We got a 5-minute break on the schedule. Anybody needs to get up and stretch or go somewhere for a moment. And in the meantime, we can goof off for just a minute. Reassemble by my clock at 3:52. Quick break.
Okay.
And I was, Dave, while you were giving your presentation, I was looking at Yankeetown on the Google satellite, and I checked the Google Earth to see what date, and the street views that they have are 2017. And it looks like a lot of the forest health issues that I've seen across the Rockies in the West and the North with pine beetle. Although it's not pine beetle, it's saltwater intrusion. I saw a little bit of that up in Washington State, some ghost forest right along an estuary, real obvious what was going on. But most of the dead forests I've seen have been beetle attacked, and these at Yanktown, even though it's 2017, I bet it's significantly more now, quite visible, a lot of dead trees.
Bruce, where were you in Washington State to see the ghost thing?
Let me go to my Google, because I can tell you exactly where it was. It may take a little bit longer.
Oh, you can just put it, send it to me later. I'm curious. Was it on the coast?
Oh, yeah, it was some salt water. Let's see.
Yeah, salt water, okay. It could have been the Puget Sound, though.
Yeah, it may have been just north of the Columbia on the 5. Matter of fact, I think that may be it right there. On the 5, I love how you guys on the left coast call your freeways. The 5, the 101. No, it wasn't that spot that I was seeing on the Columbia. It wasn't a very big spot, half a mile long. There was
Okay, well, if you find it, just send it to me.
okay. So I think it must have been up on the Peugeot. Because we came up the 5. What did we do? We went west of Olympia. I've got it in a photo. I'm pretty sure I found it. Oh, you know what? I'm able to find it here.
Oh, you know, you don't have to do it now. You don't have to use your break.
Well, unless you go. Oh, I took a break before we started.
Okay.
And we've got to hurry up and end this thing. It's getting hot up here. It's supposed to be 92 today. My studio sticks up above my house on the 2nd floor. And I got 2 little window units up here, and I had them both on to try and cool it down. But I turned them off because they're noisy. And it's up into the 80s. I haven't done a whole lot of ghost forest work yet.
I've never heard of that concept. I'd kind of like to go and see it.
Yeah, well, I'm searching ghost forest right now. I'm pretty sure I labeled it ghost forest, and I almost always, when I go through and document where I was on these expeditions, I put the place, because after a couple of years, my brain gets a little stiff.
Okay, looks. I think we're up to 5 minutes.
All right, 5 minutes.
I think.
Let's
52.
see. 52, and we need to get going. So I will leave this search up. And
Yeah.
how do I get back to full screen? Oh, Dave's still sharing. That's what's going on.
I'm still seeing Dave.
So we got to wait till Dave gets back. Dave, you back? Actually,
Yeah, I found the stop share button.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I'm just all of a sudden started seeing Stephen. And so, Stephen, you're next.
Okay. I'm ready.
And Stephen is going to
Do I have
talk
to
about
share?
the core in Miami, right?
Mm-hmm. I have my slideshow here. Do I have to share it, or will you?
No, you share it. Go to the green share thing.
Okay.
Icon at the bottom, hover at the bottom.
Let me get it set up first. Okay. Whoops. Okay, go back to it. It's too full. Now I'm gonna minimize this. Okay. Okay. Got it. And share screen. Here we go. There we go. Share. should be there.
There she goes.
Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I'm going to put this on slideshow. Yep. Okay,
There it is.
welcome. We got it going. Good. What I've done is taken excerpts from the Miami-Dade Back Bay Coastal Storm Risk Management Draft EIS. This then is a plan created by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the protection of Miami and Dade County against storm surge. And I'll give credit to U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Miami Herald for their slides on this. So we're looking at this study that's going ahead to help to protect Miami from storm surge. Here you can see then coastal, we've got downtown Miami. This is the Brickell area. These were the high rises that Mario was talking about in his book. Here, these are all the high rises, right, as you can see, right on the waterfront of Biscayne Bay. Very vulnerable situation. This is a view of the Port of Miami. He also mentioned that in his book as well, presentation. These are, and this was the draft report released for a public meeting carried out by the Corps of Engineers. Now, the Corps of Engineers is then the lead federal agency for the project, and Miami-Dade County is the non-federal sponsor, making up the rest of it. We have in Dade County about 2.8 million people and 34 municipalities, so it's a huge project here. We've mentioned resilience has come up quite a bit in Dave's presentation particularly, and here it's defined by them as the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to and adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recovery rapidly from disruptions with minimal damage. Again, building on what Dave said in his presentation here. We take into account significant near-term coastal storm risk management reduction for Miami-Dade County. And this is really then looking at the storm surge reduction, not really looking at nuisance flooding, sunny day flooding in this case. And they identified 7 of the most vulnerable areas. Again, something Dave mentioned here, vulnerable areas based on flooding potential and social impacts. Here we look at an artist's impression of, again, the Brickell area downtown, but this time with a 13-foot seawall obstructing the view of the bay. It doesn't look very large in this scale because of the size of the high-rise buildings, but you can see that if you're down at ground level, you won't be seeing any of the bay from that, because nobody really wants a 13-foot seawall obstructing the view of the bay. Other aspects of this show artists' impression of some of the gates. These gates to the Miami River. The objective of these gates is that they will close to prevent storm surge moving up the river to cause flooding further up. And you can see here, these, if you look at my cursor arrow there, the gates here at the opening of the Miami River are closed to prevent that. Here, one of the gates over here, for example, is now open, so they can be opened and closed. to allow, and closed in the case of storm surge situations there. Now the steps involved here, and got the scoping and planning strategy, the alternative formulation and analysis, the feasibility level analysis, and then we're getting up feasibility level analysis. We are up to this point now here. Step 4 was in here, where we are here going into the final report, which will be coming up next year at this point. So we're going, we are at this point in the project here. There are numerous problems, opportunities, and objectives and constraints. I'll just look at some of these. For example, problems include the geographic location, the low elevation here. As Mario mentioned, a lot of Miami-Dade County is very low elevation and high population, and it makes it very vulnerable to storm surge from hurricanes. Also, we are seeing, of course, extensive increasing king tides here, and with sea level rise here causing that increase, as Bruce mentioned here. We're also getting increasing groundwater elevations from sea level rise, resulting flood risk to inland areas. And Mario mentioned some of that, and also Dave. Increased flooding due to rain events as well occur in these situations too. Now there are opportunities involved. We try to reduce the risk of loss of life to high flooding events and infrastructure failure, to reduce the coastal storm-related economic damages and improve economic resilience, particularly concerned with low-income communities in this situation, and increasing the resiliency and structural integrity of critical infrastructure, which several people have mentioned in this already. We want to also particularly utilize available natural areas and open spaces to improve wave attenuation, water retention, and water storage. Some natural areas would be mangrove areas or parks, for example, and that kind of thing. Objectives are to increase the resiliency of Miami-Dade County to function effectively. Oops, sorry about that. Here before and during and after coastal storm events by decreasing vulnerability of critical infrastructure. We're also concerned with reducing economic damages to structures and incorporating natural and nature-based features to reduce flood damage. There are restrictions, of course, constraints, which means that we have to avoid creating or increasing flooding within the project area. We have to look at avoid flooding solutions that would increase, simply transfer the flooding to other places, to avoid impacts to the environmental and cultural historic resources, such as Everglades National Park and Biscayne National Park, which are close by. And it cannot exacerbate saltwater intrusion, which will, of course, impact the drinking water and water for agriculture. An example of natural and nature-based features, which is included in the study here, includes this mangrove development. This is a place where there was a mangrove, some mangrove forest before, is going to be restored near south of the city in the between the old Cutler Road and the bay down here, the bay below here at this point. This, when we use this, using mangroves that we see here, they will help through their prop roots that we see here to dissipate storm surge and provide a natural form of coastal protection. We need more natural shoreline protective options. These could include restored coral reefs, which will serve to attenuate storm surge and waves, seagrass beds, which help again to reduce storm surge and reduce wave action, as well as fill islands and mangroves that I already mentioned. All of these actually would effectively contribute to also a restoration of Biscayne Bay, which is a win-win situation for the city. Now here we see an artist's impression of this, the bay here with some fill islands, which will include, for example, mangroves on the islands to attenuate the wave and storm surge, and also, of course, attenuate those storm surge and wave action as they would approach the city. There are already some fill islands already in the bay as we currently have it. It would just mean building more of these, and they're an important factor in the bay. Some areas have been studied for particular focus areas, and they were based on the social vulnerability index and expected flood damage. The social vulnerability axis uses census data to look at, for example, socioeconomic status of people, the household composition, race, ethnicity, and housing and transportation. Flooding damage was estimated using the FEMA hazards model here with a 100-year annual chance flood with 4 feet of sea level rise. Now, this shows various grids that were laid over on this plan, and flooding damage was multiplied by the social vulnerability access to provide then these focus areas so that they would know where to look particularly. And so these are the 7 socially vulnerable economic damage areas. Arch Creek, which is part of North Miami, quite close to where I live. Actually, Aventura, which is considerably further north. Cutler Bay, which is south. We saw the mangroves down there. Little River, which is really quite close to me, on, as it says, the Little River. The Miami River, which of course is there, and then North Beach and South Beach. Now, some measures taken that would include perhaps elevating structures, wet or dry floodproofing of structures, and acquiring structures and relocating structures and utilities. Some of this was mentioned by Dave, in fact, of course, in terms of acquiring certain structures. They've actually trying to buy out they're buying out some properties that regularly flood in some of these situations already. So the tentatively selected plan, Alternative 8, which is the one that is favored by the Army Corps of Engineers here, includes the surge barriers, as I showed at here, Miami River, also Biscayne Canal and Little River as well, along with pump stations and flood walls. Also, they had non-structural mitigation at the 7 socially vulnerable sites that I mentioned already here, so I won't go through those again. And then nature-based features considered, for example, at the Cutler Bay site, the mangroves particularly, but also we should include, they don't include additional, the fill islands, for example, which could be added. and critical infrastructure mitigation on priority assets throughout all of Miami-Dade County. That is included. Now, the total project cost is $4.6 billion, but the annual net benefits have been shown to $1.6 billion. So it would, as you can see, wouldn't take many years for us to overcome that initial cost. So there are some issues, though, with federally protected, threatened, and endangered species. And there has to be consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service on this. Include examples such as the Nassau grouper, the various corals, boulder star coral, elkhorn coral, for example, many different corals, the manatee, even the bonneted bat, and we go on, many of the sea turtles and so on are included in those possibly endangered species. So there's a lot involved. The final design and siting of project features would not occur until later project phases in this process. And future NEPA documentation would be prepared for the site-specific projects. So those are to come. And that really looks at my introduction to this project. As you can see, we go back to the gates, projected gates on the Miami River. This bridge and area and these buildings all currently exist. This is the projected gate to the river, closed in preparation for storm surge. And I thank you for your attention, and we'll be open for questions during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I look forward. I've got some questions.
I'll stop sharing mine.
Stop sharing. Let me start. We've got one last short presentation, and then we'll have a talk. I need to fire it up first.
Oh. All right. We're doing not bad.
All righty then. Share button. I'm not sharing now, am I? I'm not muted, am I?
No, you're not sharing.
Thank you.
Not sharing.
Paul.
Not sharing.
I can't find you guys. You're lost. Where'd you go? Should be right.
We're right here.
Right there where Dave is. I just went.
Right.
Where's? All right. Let me start over. Okay. Let me find you guys again. There's Dave. There's Stephen. All right. I think that was my problem there. Now, don't minimize. Start PowerPoint again. And now go to the share. All righty then. How does that look?
Yep.
Looks
Yep.
good.
Need to make it. There we go.
All right. Restoring the mayhem to normal slowing or reversing ice sheet collapse, things to avoid. I've got a little bit to talk about with, you guys visit the website if you can. Oldest independent climate science education organization in the world. Got a little bit to talk about our Ike Dike and the Army Corps of Engineers. I'll get to it. There's some fundamentals. We've been talking about this a lot. I wanted to quickly go over them again. Our new groundbreaking climate policy. Nobody's ever done this before. It's less than 1 degree C. The reason is 1 degree, sorry about that, is how much warming we've had today. And the weather mayhem. You know, I get flack about using this repeatedly unprecedented label. But that's exactly what it is. It's the quickest way to say one unprecedented event after another. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing new records set as a matter of course. And all of them, because they're records, they're unprecedented and they're bad. And, you know, the only way to get them back to normal is to cool the planet. And we got to cool it to less than 1 C. We don't know exactly how much, probably a lot less, but we decided that less than 1 C was a really good target. It just extends the decline in the target that we've seen from 2 C down to 1.5 C. It just logically extends it on down another ½ degree C. We've also got to lower the temperature below today to allow many resilience and adaptation strategies to simply function. Because we literally can't, with sea level that continues to rise, there is no mitigation, there is no adaptation. You can't raise a high rise much. And we would need to raise it a lot because sea level rise accumulates. It doesn't just go away. We've got to reverse these tipping points that are active. It's one of the things that happened since we actually put our new policies to bed is that we now have publishing that more than half of Earth systems collapse climate tipping points are now active. They have initiation periods. We don't know how long those initiation periods are. If we can cool it off to below the activation temperature before their initiation periods complete, then we have a chance of literally reversing the irreversible. And by reducing our temperature below today's 1 C, we eliminate inequity that happens on our way to 1.5 C, and we eliminate some of the inequity that's already happened since our climate warmed above natural variability, which is about 0.5 C, by the way. It happened about 2000. So we've got some inequities that have occurred on the way to 1 C. The closer we get, the more we reduce temperature below 1 C, the more of these inequities we will eliminate. So climate change is an angry beast. Wally Broker, one of my heroes, at one time the oldest living climate scientist. He passed on 2 years ago, and it was one of his favorite sayings, climate change is an angry beast. The biggest challenge we have with climate change is not future emissions reductions. It's the climate pollutants we've already got in the sky that have caused this 1 C of warming. It's created all the mayhem. And so restoring less warming is critical to our adaptation and resilience efforts. The biggest one we're talking about with coastal issues is ice sheet collapse. This is this little ice cliff right here is 250 to 300 feet tall. This is a small town sized iceberg that's calving off of this. This is the Jacobshavn. This is the largest, fastest, most prolific ice stream in the world. It's in Greenland. It's not actually in Antarctica where most of the threat from ice sheet collapse is, but most of the ice sheet collapse threat has been caused by ocean warming. And to eliminate and reverse the collapse, the ice sheet collapse, we literally have to cool the oceans back to normal so that our ice sheets can regain their former equilibrium and not collapse anymore. That's a real thing, but to cool our oceans, first we've got to cool the atmosphere, or the oceans will begin to cool as long as we are cooling the atmosphere. And importantly, we've got to cool the atmosphere more than it appears. We've got to remove more carbon dioxide than it appears because we've got this excess built up in the atmosphere. It's warming in the pipeline. There's so much extra carbon dioxide that the cool oceans and ice sheets are keeping our atmosphere cooler than normal. So we've got to remove all this overburden, this extra climate pollutants that are in the sky, before we can even think about starting to reduce the 1C, reduce our temperature below today. It's a big job, but it's not any bigger than a lot of things we do. We treat 116 gigatons of potable water and human sewage every year in the United States. 116 gigatons. It's a huge thing. The ice sheet's a big thing. That's a helicopter. It was flying around below, inspecting this ice stream termination, is what they call it. It wasn't there when this calving event was going on. They call these mega calving events. Pretty impressive, these things. These icebergs here are literally, the ice sheet is about 3,000 feet thick, and about 10% of it sticks up above the water. And that's what we're seeing here. So when these giant icebergs break off, big, incredible things happen. And we've also got, this is under ice river coming. This is the ice sheet, actually. All this dark stuff is dirt that has been exposed from melting around the perimeters of the ice sheet. This is in Greenland, a place called Kangerlussuaq at 0.660. So our current sea level rise, Mario's connection in Miami was 6 feet of sea level rise. 10 feet is NOAA. NOAA is one of the largest. Anybody that's less than 10 feet is not taking ice sheet collapse into consideration. They're just using expert elicitation to extend the ice cube melt, which is all we've got in modeling now. All the consensus, they just use ice cube melt. They don't use any ice sheet collapse in modeling because we can't model it yet. It's too big. We have not developed those skills yet. So the consensus organizations and the vast majority of science, they ignore it. They caveat it out. They say that it may be more. It's been more, 10 to 20 feet per century in prehistory. Many times we've got evidence. And that's with forcing that's 100 times less than we're forcing our climate today. May not have make a big difference with the forcing. It's all about actual warming in the oceans that create instability and cause these collapses. Wanted to show this again because once we get to the point where sea level rise is eroding into the dunes, we don't get it back. We don't get the sea level back. We'll get this big beach back, but only over much time if we can restore sea level rise to historic levels that aren't beyond the collapse threshold. It's 5 to 7 millimeters per year collapse threshold for barrier islands. Long-term sea level rise, 3.5 millimeters, 14 inches by 2030. A lot of that's baked in. Are we going to be able to survive $14.2 trillion per year in impacts in 10 years? That's one of the big things that we really need to be including in our planning, is that it is quite possible that we're not going to be able to stop 14 inches of sea level rise because it's just going to take time to cool the atmosphere and then cool the ocean. The good news is that our oceans will likely cool faster than they warmed because of a number of different things. We can very likely cool the atmosphere much faster than we warmed it, simply by taking carbon dioxide out of it in a wartime emergency effort, or by using some kind of geoengineering, which the club does not support, but we do support further engineering in case emergency cooling is needed. Further research, because it is very likely that emergency cooling is going to be needed, and we won't be able to cool it off fast enough by simply taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And of course, all of this includes net zero. The faster we get to net zero, the faster we quit putting carbon dioxide and global warming gases into the atmosphere, the easier and the quicker it's going to be to cool the atmosphere, cool the oceans, and stop the ice sheets from collapsing. So we've got two mutually exclusive things, and our policies state that both atmospheric carbon dioxide removal and emissions reductions, net zero as soon as possible, they are complementary and compulsory. And we've been talking about this, all day long. Compulsory, we've got to do it, or we can't stop unrecoverable sea level rise. Complementary in that if we don't do it, then our mitigation strategies, our adaptation resilience strategies are going to be either less effective or they're not going to work at all. A little bit on the Ike Dike, and then we'll have some discussion, and then I'll turn the air conditioner back on. It's getting like in the mid 80s now. There's a fundamental error in climate change planning. It's that we've been trying to plan for the past. We're taking our past increases in warming, sea level rise, and other things, other impacts to climate change, and we're superimposing them on the future. But physics doesn't work that way. A little bit more warming means a lot more energy. A lot more energy means with a little more warming, you don't get a little more impacts, you get a lot more impacts. So we've got to be looking to expert judgment for things like sea level rise. We've got evidence, 10 to 20 feet of sea level rise in prehistory, with forcing 100 times less than we're forcing today, yet we're only using 2 to 3 feet of sea level rise in the consensus reports. And some people, like in Miami, they're saying worst case 6 feet. Worst case is probably more than 10 to 20 feet of sea level rise per century. And it's, the way things climate goes, probably a lot more. So it is imperative that we work on emergency cooling to get down below 1C. Now, this fundamental error, what the Army Corps did at Galveston with the Ike Dike, is they decided that they were going to build a 19 to 23 foot tall wall that was 90 miles long. It stretched from way north of Galveston, way up past Crystal City, all the way down to Surfside and Lake Jackson, and the world's largest petrochemical facility at Dow, in the famous Lake Jackson Metroplex. So they got a lot of flack for that. They got so much criticism, they actually backed off. And they have decided now that there's still got to be a big gate out in Galveston Bay to get to the ship channel and the petrochemical complex in South Houston. But they've backed off of the big wall, and now they're talking about a 19 to 23 foot tall sand dune, 90 miles long, which sounds like a good idea. But right now already, and we've talked about beach nourishment as one of the strategies to try and forestall damages, because the beach protects the dunes protect the barrier island protects the mainland. Beach goes away, we can nourish the beach from sand offshore. They do it all the time. There's probably not a single tourist beach on the planet that has not been nourished. Most of us don't go to the wild beaches. I mean, present company accepted, Sierra Club folks. So most of us don't see what wild beaches look like. They see what nourished beaches look like. The big challenge is beach nourishment is failing. I've heard of a lot of projects. I don't keep up with them a lot, but I've heard of a lot of beach nourishment projects that have not only failed, but they've had to been abandoned in mid nourishment because they just aren't working. The sand gets washed away almost as fast as it gets put on the beach. So in Follett's Island, which is south of Galveston Island. Galveston Island, there's San Luis Pass. Galveston Island's right there. Galveston's up here. Houston's way up here. This is actually my home beach. I used to hang out here. I grew up here in Alvin, south of Houston. And this has been a subsiding coastline because of oil and gas extraction. Up until the last 10 years, it started in the, probably about 1970. When oil and gas extraction down around here got big. That's why all the petrochem is down here, because there was a bunch of oil down here. So about the time and some of these pictures, actually, I don't think I put them in there. I've got pictures of me on the beach in the 70s. And it was on one of these giant 300-foot wide beaches. That started going away right after I got out of high school and left. Ran away from Houston as fast as I could. But I go back to the beach every once in a while. So Army Corps decided that because the beach was just going away, there's a road here that keeps getting wiped out every hurricane, that they needed to do some beach nourishment. So they decided, not beach nourishment, some protection. So they decided what they would do is create and actually it's only a 4 to 5 foot tall sand dune. But they thought it would be a seed dune. And they also thought another good idea would be that, hey, let's build a central clay core to the sand dune so it doesn't erode so badly. Well, this is what happens when you have a good sounding idea that's not really a good sound idea. This is that clay core dune that they put on Follett Island down there at Surfside. And the sand covering is all gone. The clay is now mixing in with the beach sand. I haven't been down there since. This happened 6 months after they finished the project. You can see some of the dune grass, the spartina that they're revegetating this thing with. But the sand all washed away. And now the clay is mixing with the beach sand. And I just can't imagine what that does to the biology. Beach biology. It's not just sand. That sand is full of live biology with ecology all of its own that supports all of those, or a lot of the shorebirds and a lot of the biology in the oceans. When you think about where creatures lay their eggs, where they pupate, where they spend their immature years, a lot of it is in the shore zone, in the swash zone of the surf. A lot of it is in the sand itself. So now we're taking that sand and filling up all of those pores in between the sand grains with these minute clay particles. So is it a good idea to create a dune barrier or a dune seed, something good sounding out of clay on the beach? Oh, the answers are not in yet, but most of us who've seen this and most of us who understand beach biology say, oh, heck no. So, the Army Corps is not known for that good of forethought at times. One of the reasons why they abandoned the wall idea and went to a big sand dune. But the rest of the story is we got to watch out what we do. Everything has an impact. This clay really needs to be scraped up and hauled inland and disposed of properly. And the rest of the story is there are mitigation things that we can do. This is where I used to hang out when I was a kid. But if we don't cool our planet below the warming today, the mayhem just gets worse. And we're already seeing it so bad. So take our policies to heart and spread the word. I think that's my last picture. Visit the website. So what do you guys want to talk about? We got, actually we're 4 minutes over. Is everybody still here?
Well, we've lost some people because they said, hey, it's been 2.5 hours and I got to leave. We've lost Judy Weiss and Jody Malinowski. So we are overtime.
Right, we're down to 7 people.
How many do we have all total?
7.
No.
We had
now
12.
We had 12. It's 3 rows
Oh,
of
we had way
4.
more than that.
No, we were up to 16. You were up to 16, including Mario. Oh, then when he left, it went back up to 16. So the biggest number was 16.
16.
All right. Well, not bad.
Well, you were, you didn't, yeah.
We've got some competition. We're in the middle of the day. I've seen a decline of Zoom participation over the last couple of months. A lot of our normal Zoom meetings we've been having, we've been getting a third less, a half less folks regularly every over the last several months.
Yeah, I think people are getting zoomed out.
Zoom
It's
fatigue.
really, really, really hard. Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of content. It was really good content, but it does make you think carefully about planning for our drought one on how long it should be.
Yeah, I think you're right in terms of length of time. People have a limited tolerance. I know my wife came in and said, "Are you still on that?"
Right.
Well, it's a webinar, not just a normal Zoom meeting.
It's a workshop.
So,
Good stuff on the Texas coast, Bruce. I mean, that's where I grew up, surfing in Surfside, Lake Jackson area. And you're right, it's been,
Did
but
you?
that's been eroding for a very long time. The old Brazos Delta area there. I was surprised to see how much dune erosion has occurred on Padre. I did my field work on Mustang Island, and I was hoping you'd have some pictures there too. But I'll get down there. I'll have to go look.
yeah, I just South Padre is 6 hours from Austin. We used to go to the National Seashore and Port A and Mustang, all the time. And then I started filming and realized that the beach at South Padre, they get a lot less rain down there. And so there's a lot more loose sand, blowing and shifting sand. And it's a much more photogenic beach. And so, it's about, what I do is about shock and awe. And a pretty picture, a pretty devastating picture is worth more than a plain devastating picture. So I literally, we're going to Penn's. We're doing a COVID trip. We're not going to any bathrooms. We're not eating out. We're just running down to the National Seashore and camping in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it'll be the first time in 3 years I've been down there.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to compare the amount of dune vegetation. You could use your drone, be able to do some aerials, and the impact of having the dune vegetation and stabilizing dunes. Mustang Island gets a little more moisture. I didn't see much beyond railroad vine in your photos, and not much of the dune grass and goat weed and whatever. I mean, one of the questions I asked was whether having the mangroves now invading not only central Texas coast, but moving on up the coast may help stabilize the bay shores, at least if we lose the barrier islands.
Until we inundate them.
Yeah.
No.
One thing, I did my research on the fauna of the beaches down there, and this has got to have a tremendous impact on the Donax community and the ghost crabs and all the stuff that lives in that intertidal zone there.
And the beach badgers.
Beach badgers.
Beach badgers. Did you ever see any badgers down there?
No.
They're
What are they?
they're on North Padre. I don't know if they're on South. It's badger. Beach
It is?
badger is just what I call them. It's just like turtle people. They're not really turtles. They're the turtle biologists that are monitoring the Kemp Ridley's endangered. But no, beach badgers, they dig for ghost crabs on the beach. And now that there's a lot less beach, they're seeing more beach badger deaths by automobile because the automobiles get close and the badgers stick their heads up out of the hole that they've been digging for the ghost crab in and get smacked.
Ouch.
Yeah, and it's like it wasn't that much of a problem with the rangers down there. Tell me in the past when there was a beach, because there's a lot less conflict between the vehicles and the badgers because now there's just very little room for the vehicles to drive because there's so little beach.
Bruce, I have a question about when they replenish the sand with sand, because my sister-in-law's from North Carolina, and they're always putting sand back on the beaches. Okay, this sand is coming from someplace. What's the effect of where we're taking the sand from? It must have some ecological damage. I mean, we're taking sand from someplace. What's that all about?
Yeah, I got a couple of things going on with dredged sand. One is organic content, and it can actually be a significant carbon emission source because typically sediments are going to be anoxic, which they don't have any oxygen going through them. They're kind of preserved. So you get organic material accumulating with sand on the bay floor, say, or even on the ocean floor or the Gulf floor. And because it's doesn't have a good supply of oxygen like the water column above it, it's preserved. And when you dredge it and place it on the beach or somewhere else to build land out or whatever you're doing, it exposes oxygen, and so that carbon starts coming out.
Oh, so is the sand coming from dredging the area itself, or is it being imported from other places?
Dredging, but from other places, and so it's like the intercoastal canal is always needing to be maintenance dredged, and a lot of the bays through which the intercoastal travels have a lot of sand deposits in them. There's sand deposits, and there's silt, and there's clay, and it's geology. It's variable for many different reasons, but you get these massive sand deposits on the coast because it's the coast, and so they tend to try whenever there is a sand deposit handy where there's some dredging they need to do to waste that sand on a beach somewhere. And I mean waste, I mean by dispose of it. There's also offshore where there's not any dredging that needs to be done, or there's no sand available in dredging that needs to be done. There are massive sand deposits offshore because, sea level used to be 300 feet lower than it is today back in the Ice Age. All that was beach out there, massive sand deposits. So you just got to go find it and have a dredge that has a long enough snout to get down there and dredge it up.
Okay.
Yeah, Miami Beach, they're always renourishing every few years. I mean, something like less than 5 years, and you have to renourish it. So what they do is go to places like Hall of a Cut, which needs dredging out anyway, because it's a channel that gets blocked up. And they basically vacuum up the sand from the channel and then bring it onto the beach. So they have a huge, massive pipe that just sucks it up from down there and dumps it out on the beach. And they've got it's terrible for the life though. I mean, the coral reefs just get devastated, blown away by the deposit. All that sand just gets eroded, and any patch reefs that are offshore just get smothered completely. Really,
Orrin Pilkey told us decades ago to stop doing this crap, and we continue to do it regardless of habitat impacts, the cost to the taxpayers, and it's a ridiculous thing. I hate calling it beach nourishment. We need to quit calling it positive things. It's a terrible process. And I objected to that being in the policy of this particular grassroots team, that beach nourishment has to be looked at very, very carefully. It causes downstream impacts. It causes upstream impacts. It's just, we should not be in the business of supporting that.
Yeah,
There's so much silt. It's the silt that washes out of the sand and back into the water, and that's what's creating all the havoc. And it's got the organic material with it. It creates a nutrification. And there was Elaine, you may be interested in this, the Port of Brownsville channel. They were doing maintenance dredging on it about 4 years ago, and maybe 5, and they're putting all the sand on the beach there in front of South Padre, all of the high rises. And not quite a year and a half into the project, it just all washed away, and they literally abandoned the nourishment project.
Sure. My husband worked for the Corps of Engineers as a dredge operator. I mean, I know exactly what they do.
Yeah.
And it's usually in place so that it goes back into the channel they just dredged over time. It keeps the Corps busy forever.
Yeah. Those spoiled dredge piles, literally just right there. Just it's like you digging a hole where, as far as you can throw the dirt with your shovel, that's where they put it, and it all comes back into the hole once the dredge pile gets busy.
Absolutely. I will say there have been a few projects I'm aware of on the Texas Gulf Coast where beneficial use was actually accomplished, but it was not with the Corps pulling the trigger. It was with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service trying to rebuild some of the marshes at Aransas Wildlife Refuge, and they directed where the material went, how it was contained, how it was revegetated, not the Corps.
And I don't want to call the Corps biologists not real biologists, but I think
go ahead.
They're out. I think they get outranked is what happens. I just can't imagine, and I don't know if I know some USFW biologists. I know lots of biologists. I don't think I actually know any Corps biologists, but I just can't imagine that the biologists are that different. I just think they get outranked.
Well,
whatever.
The Corps is really, they're really run by engineers, and so.
Hey, now you're talking engineer.
Hey, careful.
As a biologist.
Yeah, but you never worked for the Corps.
No.
I'm not a normal engineer. Yeah, I'm a Texas A&M graduate, and people look at me, really?
I went to Rice. Sorry. We're old enemies, guys. For those who don't know.
And hey, Charles Dixon. Hello, Charles. Good to see you.
I'm enjoying it.
Say again?
I'm enjoying your shows.
Oh, good. Glad you could come.
Where's he from?
I'm up about 400 miles north of Galveston in deep East Texas, where all the California people are moving.
Oh. Interesting.
Appreciate you being here. See us. And there's Paul and our 2 Elaines.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Are there any other questions at this point or comments?
How about anything in the chat? Let's see.
Now, I submitted one on the Kemp's Ridley project. I mean, that they
Yeah.
were rebuilding the nesting population on Padre, and now with the loss of the beach, it really doesn't make any difference if there's no beach to lay eggs on.
You know, I like to hang out with the turtle people when I'm down there. And
Did you know Tony Amos?
you know, that name sounds familiar. Was he like number 2 or something for a while?
He was at the UT Marine Lab, and he was doing the first work on the beaches there with turtles, did rehabilitation at the Marine Lab. He has passed away about 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah, no, I didn't know Tony. I came in, 2000, shortly after 2000. And then I didn't start, you know, I was fishing instead of filming about climate change until.
Yes, and nice red drum on those photos.
Oh, I did a lot of fishing. I actually have a homemade wooden flats boat. I fish the fly in the back bays. Port O'Connor is my home port. So I just know whenever a turtle person drives by on an ATV, and half the time the parks persons, national parks people, I'll flag them down, talk to them, because I'm down there solo camping and fishing or camping and shooting pictures, and I want to know what they got to say, and the turtles will, there's going to be, I think, a place for the turtles for a while. We're going to be getting more storms. We're getting wash over. So there's going to be sand. Like on North Padre, it's mostly grass. But there's going to be, I don't know, you probably know North Padre 15, 20 years ago, there was a lot more washovers. There was one big storm in the mid 90s or maybe around 90 that made, I don't know, a dozen washovers on the national seashore. And, it took 10, 15, 20 years for them to all close up. But we're going to be getting more of those.
Bruce.
Yeah.
Sorry, but I have to leave. So y'all keep on talking, but I'm going to have to leave.
Yeah,
Aloha.
I need to sign off. It's been great.
Oh, let me
Anyway,
take back the thing.
Yeah, take the host.
Reclaim
Aloha.
host. All right, I'm in charge now.
You got the host?
Bye, Dave. I got
Bye,
the
Dave.
host. Bye, Stephen.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Anyway.
Bye,
Thank you.
Paul.
Go ahead. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Now, I want to talk to Bruce before he goes, because
All right.
Port O'Connor is where I grew up.
Really?
Yeah, on the beachfront, there is a little place called the Nut Hut, about 3 houses up from the jetty, north, between the beach and the jetty. And
When
that
was it?
was the Giesel.
Oh,
The
that is
Nut
so
Hut.
cool. When did they stop calling it the Nut Hut?
It's still labeled the Nut Hut, I think.
Is it? What
It's
is
for
it?
sale now. Had a sign. It's just our house. My dad was a nut. It's okay.
Oh,
There is a rock groin south of the beach there
yeah.
that I call the Giesel groin. And that was the only thing I can really take credit for in terms of fighting the Corps of Engineers. When they wanted to emplace the beach there, I accused them of open bay disposal, because the north winds move all that sediment straight back into the channel there at Port O'Connor. And I
Right.
argued with them. Well, the Gulf Restoration Network and I had gone up to the Pentagon and met with the new Green Corps back when, this was 25 years ago. And they came down, and I stood them on that seawall there by the beach. And I said, you understand, the north wind just beats the hell out of this seawall, and all the sediment here gets eroded back into that channel or into the Spartina Marsh right in front of the Nut Hut. And they put in first a geotextile tube. That was and then they eventually put rock on it. That is the Giesel groin, and it's the only thing I left behind in Texas that is still standing, I think. So when you fish out there, I want you to know that
I see.
Spartina
So
Marsh.
Is it
The
the one
third
with,
house from the jetty
it's the third house from the jetty. So
on the beach.
Is the Giesel groin the one with the angle on it?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
I made them
Okay.
curve. I told them if they didn't, they were going to have all that sediment down them with the last remaining Spartina Marsh in front of Port O'Connor. And so they put in a tube to block the movement of sediments. And it stabilized the beach, but it still comes around the tip. But that marsh is growing out. I was down there a couple of years ago, and that's where I noticed the mangrove now are invading the Spartina Marsh. It's changed. Changes all the time. But
Okay.
yes, I am part of the history of that area. Marilyn Giesel is still my sister-in-law. She lives there in town. And my brother and Marilyn ran a boat operation, for the oil rigs back when, Hustler Marine. So long history there.
That is great. What was your address?
Oh, Lordy.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
know.
Maple.
I know.
101 something.
Well, it's the Washington Street, or it was
Yeah.
it Park Street.
It's at the corner of Maple and Washington, I think.
Cool.
There are 3 houses in a row there, and we're the one in the middle. But we sold it about 10 years ago. Someone else has remodeled it. We got out. We got out partly because of sea level rise. But we bought right after Hurricane Carla. So
wow.
we've watched the beach prograde since 1961. Carla eroded the coastline all the way back to where the front of the house is now. And all of that in front is progradation.
Wow.
In what is it now? 60 years. So it's interesting now the sea level rise is occurring. We're going to see reversal of the process.
Yeah.
It's interesting to have been observing it for this long as a marine scientist. I started going down there in the early 60s doing, speckled trout fishing on the oil wells out there in Matagorda Bay. So have been there since a teenager.
There's so much. It's
hunted ducks, floundered. That's my part of the world.
Oh, it's just I've all that stuff. I mean, I haven't done. And the last time I was in Puerto Carmen, last time I was in the Back Bays, was 2007. But I spent 10 years running around in my little wooden boat with a 25 horsepower Merc, and I got a cousin down there too, Carolyn Smith.
Name sure sounds familiar, but it's a common name.
I can't remember her husband's name. I think they're still alive. I mean, they're older cousins. I think they're my mom's cousins, and I'm 60, but I haven't heard that they've died yet. And as much as we went down there, we never went and saw them. We went to the boat ramp, and we were gone.
Yeah.
We camped out at the pass. We caught truckloads of bulls.
Yeah. Point Decros is a nice place to go.
Yeah. Oh, and
we used to go across the Matagorda Peninsula, and we did our surfing. We hauled surfboards across from the old Army docks in Matagorda Peninsula over to the Gulf side to do our surfing because there was a good break there. So we hauled ass with surfboards across Matagorda Peninsula. It was, those were the days,
Did you see that, was a storm last year, maybe 3 years ago, opened up Sundown Bay all the way?
No.
It did.
I mean, there's the big storms. I know Harvey went in right over the Marine Lab and into Fulton where my brother still lived.
It was Harvey that opened it up.
It was Harvey?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not surprised.
Going to
there were a bunch of washovers that developed along Padre even back in the day. They wanted to stabilize some of them to open up the upper end of Laguna Madre. But I remember, did you know Pat Suter with Sierra Club?
Oh, yeah.
Pat and Hal. And I worked with them. I was up in the mid-coast. So
did you know that Hal just
worked as...
Did you know that Hal just
Say that again?
Hal passed recently?
No.
He did. He had cancer.
Is his mom still alive?
I think so. They were both in the same care facility. He was in hospice, and she was just there at the care facility. But she stopped coming because I sit on Austin Lone Star XCOM Sierra Club, and
I was there about 5 years.
When were you there? Because you looked familiar.
Ken Kramer was still the director then, and I moved up here in 1999, so it must have been about 1995 to 99.
Ken was director for 28 years.
I know. We kept in touch. He's still doing water work, isn't he, for the chapter?
Oh, yeah. He's still real active with the club. He's just free now.
No, he's even paid even less than we paid him.
Yeah, right.
God, we didn't pay him.
Hopefully he was prudent with his pennies. But he's still doing good stuff for water.
Good. Well, tell him hello. I used to work with him and Stuart Henry on water issues to mostly freshwater inputs to the Gulf Coast. So been there, done that.
I was a member of Trout Unlimited when, was it Stuart that got the settlement with Guadalupe River Authority?
Think so.
when he did that. And that's actually how I met him. He had been, and that was in the mid 90s. And of course, he had been a fixture environmental attorney for a couple of decades before that. Cool stuff.
He represented me. He represented us on a permit hearing for the wastewater discharge from Formosa Plastics. I work mostly in the Matagorda Bay area with the Superfund site at Alcoa and the Formosa discharge. And with Diane Wilson, we played good cop, bad cop a lot.
Cool.
We
gave Diane
it was kind of fun.
an award. Her story is awesome. We gave her an award at our Zoom award ceremonies with Lone Star just a couple weeks ago.
Cool.
Honored her.
Yeah, I got the Ruddenberg. Yeah, are they still doing the Herm Ruddenberg Award?
Yeah. I wonder, is that for coordinating?
No, Herm Ruddenberg was a marine biologist in Galveston, and he was one of our first really, he and Mary Lou Campbell and Pat Suter were kind of the big wigs on marine issues back in the day. And I joined in with them, and I got the Ruddenberg Award one year, I think, for the work in Matagorda Bay. So yeah, it's good to see you. It's awesome to see pictures of the dunes and the coast.
Oh, but
we've all camped there.
Yeah, and you know how it works too. I'm showing the shock and awe 53 times a year. If you're there when it's happening and it's not dark, the surf is into the dunes. But the rest of the time, it's low tide. Amazing. It's still a beautiful beach, and there'll always be a low tide. And until the islands disintegrate, it'll always be beautiful. And can you still drive all the way to Big Shell, or is that now too narrow? Both. No, low tide. And generally it's only, I don't know how many times they've closed the beach. In 2017, I heard they closed it a dozen times. But I've only been stopped the once in 2013, and you could have driven. It's just, you got to drive through the water some, which is bad. No. Maybe an old Suburban, not my car. Yeah. No. Well, it's been a pleasure, Bruce, and I'll try to get on some of the other calls. I'm most interested in the coastal resilience and the issues of what in the hell are we going to do about this? It's hard to imagine trying to save a city like Miami. I mean, I shake my head and go, let it drown. Why are we messing with Florida? I don't see any hope. The rest of that is, if we let a couple of cities like that drown, that's going to take our global economy out. That's the deal. Well, wait till New Orleans. The port of New Orleans is gone, and the port of Houston. Worry about them. Couple of cities like that. It's just, and that's so that takes the rest of us out. So it's like, well, you got to save the bathwater for the baby or whatever. It's just like, no, we've got to do this. And the bottom line is, we just got to stop climate change. Period. We got to reverse it. But don't ask the Corps to do it. Corps is a bad actor. Elaine, I want to get in contact with you. I want to put your email in my easy address. The name I use is ECOS, ECOS, at Everest, as in Mount Everest, everestkc.net. ECOS, ECOS, at everestkc.net. Right. I'm in the Kansas City area. We moved up here to take care of my husband's folks. They both died, and then he died. So I'm still here, but I'm here. I'm still breathing. It's okay. I wish I could tell you the beach houses were starting to get cheap because of sea level rise, but that ain't happened yet. No, I actually looked at the old nut hut to see what they wanted for it, and they wanted way more than we paid to build it. And I thought, no, I don't really want beachfront property anymore. Thank you. Are they up above 200,000 in Port O'Connor now? Oh, that one was 500,000, 400,000, 500,000, and it wasn't 100,000 to build. I mean, but it's beachfront property. It was 2 lots, and you can walk right out and flounder and crab. You can hunt redhead ducks from the deck practically. We did. Have you seen the boardwalk? No. They put a big old boardwalk. Google Port O'Connor and go just north. They put a big old boardwalk, big old bird watching boardwalk back in there. Where am I?
Oh, up in the
it's-
marsh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, just
Boy, that
right
was a
north of
muddy
town.
area.
Let's see. Can you see it? Can you see?
I have to get on my other computer.
I'm just trying to see if you can actually, you should be able to see it.
It must have been down by the old dump. We used to drive down there and burn trash, but that was good birding back in there. But the floundering was horrible. It was just muddier than hell back there. It was all soft, gooey stuff. Ate
There
your
it is.
shoes.
Is that it? Yeah, I'm remembering more than it's just, it's about the size of the Giesel groin. It seems like there was more. Maybe you know what? I've got it confused with the boardwalk at Porte.
Oh, that's a nice one. That's
Yeah.
a good one.
But
Yeah.
it's
The one in Corpus is good, that Pat worked on.
yeah. Oh, I love those.
And Rockport's got a great boardwalk. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
Ted. What was his last name? The guy who did the birding trail. Ted. Yeah, help me. It's been 20 years, guy.
Oh, I know that name too.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name. I'm horrible with names.
He was with Audubon and developed the Texas birding trail on the coast
Yeah.
there.
What is his name?
Yeah, really. Ted something.
Elaine. It's wonderful.
Well, good. Good
I'm
to reminisce.
I'm going to write you just so that we can make contact. And,
Good.
I'll put you'll be in my book. I mean, you just know, you're like Kramer. You know where all the bodies are buried.
I really do. And I know a lot about the coast. On the bookshelf behind me are all the books that the geologic office at UT put out on coastal Texas geology and stuff. I've kept it. I can't get rid of it. But I'd like to get down. I'll be in Rockport. I'll probably be in Rockport next month to see family. I'll try to get down to the Mustang Island and look around.
They're doing better after Harvey.
Yep, good.
They took a big hit. Rockport
They did.
as well as Porte.
Yeah. I was down there about 2 months afterwards. It was rough.
Well,
All right,
we
Bruce.
know.
Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Elaine. You too.
All right.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.